Road Trips and Missing Persons by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 7. Logan was a calm man. One would have to be with his chosen career path. Much of it was waiting quietly for the perfect moment, or doing rapid calculations in one's head while in the midst of danger and chaos. He had not made it this far in his career by being prone to emotional outbursts or irrational behavior. Logan was a calm, rational person, which is what he told himself, even as he threw his phone across the room and it smacked the opposite wall. "God damn it, Patton!" he yelled as the other employees in the control room all paused to glance at him before quickly looking away. He took a deep breath and walked across the room to his phone. It was, of course, unharmed, seeing as Roman had specifically worked with a manufacturer to produce him an indestructible phone for his last birthday, and on top of that had given him a life-proof case for it. Roman, his son, who he had not heard from for over an hour at this point. He clenched his fist around the phone. He could not get emotional about this. That would not be productive at this point. He needed to think. He needed to plan. He needed someone to answer their phone. Hearing of Remington's death was already distressing enough on a personal level, as he'd known the man for years. As a father himself, he had understood why Remington wanted to be on desk duty since his son was born, and he had respected that. Emil at the time hadn't even been a legal adult, and there was the real risk that if something happened to Remy, that his son would end up in the hands of the boy's mother, who at the time had simply been considered a raging bitch, according to Remy, but had later proved herself that and more. So, Logan had never even thought about having him back in the field until Virgil was at least 18. Yet, it had still happened. He was still dead, targeted by Virgil's own mother. As he imagined Remington would want, Logan's first thought had been for the man's son, and he'd immediately dispatched Roman as he'd been the closest agent to the house at the time. That is when things started to go even more wrong than just a missing agent. The last Logan had heard from his own son, he'd been tracking down Virgil Gates and whoever Roman had assumed attempted to kidnap him. He'd found the kidnapper's car still down the street and texted Logan that he'd checked the nearby bus station and would check the park next. Thinking he had that sorted with Roman on finding the teenager, his mind had wandered to Janice, the boy's brother. Logan had worried that Janice would have an intense emotional response to the situation and had sent the agent a fake mission in hopes of distracting him until the issue with Virgil was sorted. The text had been marked as read only a few moments later, but there had been no response. That was concerning, to say the least. It was possible he had heard of Remington's death himself and was distracted, but there would be no reason for him to ignore Logan's text, as he shouldn't be aware Logan himself knew of Remington's death. In fact, it would be more in character for him to text Logan back and inform him of the issue in that case. After waiting a few more minutes, he tried texting Roman again and got no response, and then he tried again and again. Soon it had been 20 minutes since he last heard from Roman, and he had attempted to call him. He hadn't got an answer. After a few more phone calls, he'd tried to call Remus to ask him if he'd heard from his brother, but he hadn't answered either. He continued to rotate between calling and texting the two of them, and sometimes Janice, hoping one of them would pick up, but none of them did. With no word from either of his sons or his double agent about their whereabouts or the missing child's, he'd decided to call the boy's uncle. When that phone call ended with a car honking and a scream, and none of his attempts to call back got any response, Logan really started to panic. Or worry. Not panic. Concerned, even. Logan started to get a healthy amount of concerned. There were only thousands of reasons he could think up for the radio silence from everyone with a connection to his agency in a certain geographical region, especially directly after the confirmed death of one of his inactive agents who lived in the area. Surely one of those thousands wasn't that every one of them was dead, including his own sons. Thinking about his family, it occurred to him that considering Patton was an agent, though on vacation at the moment, and also lived in the area, he needed to call his brother as well. The relief from his brother actually answering his phone was quickly burned away by the agitation, as he was not where he was supposed to be. Though a voice in the back of Logan's head did wonder if perhaps that's why he's still able to answer his phone, and instead was on an impromptu road trip. After providing no other information to Logan, Patton had hung up on him. He'd been sent to voicemail halfway through the second time he tried to call back. The bastard had turned off his phone. So the question was what to do now. He collapsed back into his seat and glanced at his phone, hoping he'd received some form of communication from anyone in the last minute, but alas, there was still nothing. He was regretting making his agent's cell phones untraceable. He wondered if he could hack into Nelson's network without her realizing. He knew she kept trackers on her agents. Janice, at least, would have his phone from her, and Remus might. Assuming, of course, she hadn't ordered a hit on them and taken back the cell phones herself. He wouldn't put it past her. It was worth a try, at least, he decided, booting up his computer. He had a better chance now, since Janice had let him look at his phone a few times. However, neither of them had wanted to risk trying any hacking on it. Nelson had no qualms about taking her own family out after all. Logan had been suspicious that she'd killed Logan's mentor years ago, but he hadn't any proof. Janice had confirmed this as fact almost 2 decades later when he'd told Logan that she talked about the fact that she killed her own father to him. Remembering that fact made him more nervous for Janice, and Remus by extension. They had already been very careful, but the risk was still there. Not to mention, if Janice was in emotional distress over the death of Remington, then he might be less careful. He distracted himself from those churning thoughts by turning his attention back to the computer. He wasn't surprised that there were no weaknesses in her security that he could find. After all, they'd had the same teacher, and she'd doubtlessly learned more from him over the course of her life since she'd been his daughter. He took a break to look at his phone again after 10 minutes. There were still no messages from anyone. He tried to call everyone's phones again in quick succession, but no one picked up. He just pressed end after the voicemail picked up for Roman again when a voice interrupted him. "Sir?" Darlene said tentatively. "Yes," he ground out, still looking at his phone. He was trying not to snap at any of his employees, but it was getting difficult. "We pinged an outgoing call from Virgil Gates' cell phone," she said. "What?" Logan asked, looking up at her. Both he and Roman had tried to call the boy's cell phone, but it had gone directly to voicemail, and they'd assumed he'd either ditch the phone or turn it off. "Show me." He got to his feet, and she led him to another computer. On her computer, a map was pulled up, and a little red dot lit up the place the call had come from. "Where is he?" Logan asked. "Around Livensburg," she answered. "That's almost 80 miles from the city," Logan said. At least he was moving closer to Logan's location instead of further away. "Well, he seems to be on the interstate," she pointed out. "Pretty easy to do." "Yes, the question is how a 15-year-old is getting down the interstate," Logan said. "Check bus routes and calls to taxis," he said to the room at large before turning back to Darlene. "Who did he call?" "He was trying to call Emil Picani. And didn't get through, I'd imagine." "No," she confirmed. Poor kid, Logan thought. "Well, at least we have a starting point. I'll send another team out to the location, though extreme caution will be advised." "I'll go," Frederick volunteered before he could even ask. "Thank you," Logan said. "I can go too," Darlene suggested. Logan nodded. "Because of the phone communication issues at the moment, I'm giving you a long-distance listening device, and I expect you to have it on and on one of your persons at all times." They both nodded, and Frederick turned to go get the proper supplies while Darlene looked back at her computer. "Another phone call just went out from Virgil's phone," Darlene said. "It's to the phone you provided Janice Nelson. There's no answer there, either." Well, that answered whether or not Janice was ignoring him in favor of worrying for his brother. Clearly something was going on, and Logan was afraid of what.